Hello, and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today we have Jonny Landels, and he's a master of pretty much making the complex shit simple for most people, because way too often we overcomplicate everything. We know that we should be starting off small and then gradually building our way up there, but as soon as we get started, all common sense goes down the toilet and we're trying to master everything at once and acting as though we have eight hands and we're not octopuses. So that doesn't really work. So I will let Jonny take it away pretty much to say basically what most people struggle with when it comes to food, because most problems we have with food have nothing to do with food, really, do they?
No, not at all. And it's first, first time I think I've been called a master at anything. So, appreciate the props. I'm definitely not a master, but I am what I would call a lifelong student. So in terms of continuing to read and learn as much as I can about human behavior and, why we do certain things, and then the ability of helping people, is definitely something I'd say never stops for anyone who might be listening to this who is a coach or wants to coach. Just devote your time not just to the science of nutrition and training, but also to the science of helping people change. Because as you mentioned there, Ruby, we instinctively know what we need to do. Everyone has that ability to change within them, but it needs to be helped, brought out of them. And it's very tempting to think that we need more advanced strategies because of what we see on social media, what we see on YouTube, and what we see on the internet, versus then the lifestyles that we ourselves lead. So if you're someone who's following a lot of personal trainers, a lot of maybe physique competitors, or a lot of athletes, or whatever realm that you're in terms of sort of training and nutrition, there'll be people who are at like the peak of maybe a professional career, and the things that they need to do in order to get results, or the things that they might be adding to their program, look really sort of sexy and complex. But what we forget as layman people looking at these things is that these people usually have years of consistency at the basics before they get to that point. And also the years of basics are the stuff that's got them the results and would continue to get them the results anyway. So it's easy for us to look at these people and think, man, I need something really complex. But actually, there's quite a few things we need to focus on and do really well in order to get most of the results that we would care for anyway, particularly as someone who's a general population just wanting to lose a bit of fat, be healthier for long term, rather than trying to focus on a billion things. There are actually just a few key things we need to do and do well in order to get results. And rather than that being a bad thing, I would say to your audience, that's actually a very, very good thing, because it means that for someone who's got a job and kids and a life outside of fitness and nutrition, you can't spend so much time focusing on everything because you don't have that time. You need to focus your time on the basics that are going to get you the results, because that way you're going to be more consistent, get better results, and make better progress. So first thing I'd say is it's easy to see things and think, man, I need this really super complex strategy and I need to do a lot of things. But actually, it boils down to doing those basics well and analyzing your life honestly and thinking, okay, what basics am I missing? And then systematically trying to tick those off.
You mentioned something super important there, and that's the fact that a lot of people already have years behind them. And the same thing, like even in training, when people are doing these complex things, which we then think we need to do, which we probably don't, but the same thing comes to nutrition, like applying these advanced strategies like carb cycling or calorie cycling, or when does this need to happen, or even as simple as breaking it down to the behaviors of, okay, maybe we can fit in this cookie or we can fit in this ice cream. Whereas matter of factly, at the beginning, it's actually best to learn how to practice the discipline of saying no, because if you're going to keep saying yes to all of these things, in reality, you're saying no to your goals, in saying no to actually changing the person you are. And
Mm-hmm.
said as well, there's a few things you need to focus on and do well at. And if you're too busy trying to fit in all these other things, add in more flexibility and movement, you're making it more difficult for yourself, aren't you? And it's that whole, you're not actually analyzing your life, as you mentioned as well, because if you're analyzing all of that and realizing this isn't actually working for you, you would stop doing those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I think, Ruby, it comes down to, like, as you said, there's got to be a place where you stop saying yes to everything, particularly when it comes to food. Like, there's a phrase like everything in moderation, but obviously if you had everything in moderation, then you would be over your calorie intake. And we do need to be aware of that, but because of different people's activity levels, sizes, and goals, they're going to have very different calorie intakes. But it's looking at trying to be as mindful and aware of your food intake as possible, because I totally agree with the like motivation and willpower arguments. I find people get tripped up because they either view food as good or bad, and then they sabotage themselves when they have something they deem as bad, or they tell themselves negative stories about these foods that they can't execute willpower, they can't execute control. They're like, okay, when I see chocolate, I just binge, or like, oh, I can't handle having just one Tim Tam or just one cookie, like I have to have a whole pack. And that's not coming from any real evidence. That's just their story they're telling themselves. And that either comes from having parents who were rigid dieters or having done rigid diets themselves. And because they've done these rigid protocols full of extreme rules, they're now in a cycle where they either have to be very, very restrictive with their intake, they think, to get results, or they're not at all. And they just oscillate between these all or nothing strategies. If it's either really, really strict and really, really boring food intake, or it's I'm having pizza for breakfast. And we really need to help people find that middle ground where you can have these foods, but in a moderation. And so exercising willpower is 100% a great thing to practice. And because willpower is often misunderstood, people think like, oh man, I'm going to use it all up here and then I don't have enough of it at the end of the day. Willpower is like a muscle where the more you use it, the stronger it will become. And if you can use some form of monitoring technique around your food, whether that be tracking calories or whether that be even just writing down your food, and I find actually writing down food with a pen and paper makes you much more mindful about that food as opposed to tracking it on a phone or writing it on a laptop, because there's something about the handwritten technique that makes you much more aware of what you're doing. You can start to discover how to fit these foods in a smaller amount of ways and still reach your goals. And for most of my clients, as you rightly said at the beginning of this podcast, most of our problems about food have nothing to do with the food. So a lot of the time, these trigger foods that people have, in terms of, the common ones are ice cream, chocolate, pizza, chips, those kind of things. A lot of the time, we instinctively know that we would enjoy them more if we had them in smaller doses. Okay, I'll have that, but I'll have a very small portion and I'll be present in the moment and really enjoy it. But a lot of people turn to these foods because they are stressed or emotional or bored or all of the above. And we need to help our clients discover when they are in those emotional states, being able to identify those emotional states, and then being able to address those emotional states properly. Okay, I'm bored. Like, why am I bored? Is that because I'm not actually enjoying this TV show? I'm trying to chill out and I thought watching TV helped me chill out, but actually I'm bored watching this TV show. So what can I do that will help me relax but won't cause me to boredom eat? And then you can discuss, you can start to look at their hobbies and their other things that they do. What are they not doing in their life they'd like to do? Same thing with stress and emotion. Okay, I'm stressed. Why am I stressed? Okay, I've had a crappy day at work. I usually smash the biscuit jar, but that doesn't help me relieve my stress. It actually makes me feel more guilty because then I feel bad for wrecking my dietary progress. So what can I do now to relieve my stress that doesn't involve food? And this will be a very interesting, new way for clients to look at things, because they'll just be used to using the food to cure their emotions. But as soon as you help your clients understand these positions and parts of their day where they're doing this, and they become aware of it, now they can start exploring different strategies. And it won't be an overnight fix, but the more conscious people can become of their food intake, the more they'll understand, all right, okay, on a daily basis, I can enjoy the foods that I like. I can have snack foods as long as I'm, really enjoying them and they're part of my progress. But I need to be managing my emotions properly and not through food or drink.
I find it hilarious in a sad way. Like just when you were saying that, it kind of just occurred to me how funny it is that it's always food. Like, we have an emotion, and it's so funny how the solution is always food. And while you were talking, like, why is it food? Like, why do we go to the food? But it like, you literally mentioned nothing about hunger. You mentioned nothing about we need fuel because it's time to eat. I'm hungry. I need to actually fuel myself. It's just like, why is it this food that's the trigger? And this literally highlights the fact that the problems we're having have nothing to do with the food itself. And I have this lady, this is probably going to be a little winded because it kind of can stem into so many different things. I have this lady in my inbox. She's in her 50s. She messaged me randomly saying how embarrassed she was to message me because she's 50 and I'm this young chick, pretty much how she said it. And then she listed out her problems and how she's been doing it for 38 years. And then we had a little conversation. I sent her my podcast. She came back to me saying, she was pretty much saying how embarrassed she was that my podcast was full of all of this amazing information and I make so much sense to her issues, yet someone her age can't get it, and it made her feel embarrassed. So I feel like that whole, like, people feel like it's too late to change, or they feel like they should know better. Or it's like, I've been doing this for so long. I've been trying so many different things. Why haven't I changed? But I want to go into two different aspects here. Both that, but then also you mentioned that the first, how we're comparing to other people, whether it be comparing to what they're eating or the way that they manage food. And then how I mentioned how they manage the whole moderation, how moderation is different for different people. Some people can't actually be a moderator at first until they develop the confidence in themselves, because without that confidence, that moderation is just going to be an all or nothing. And then again, comparing to people who may already have a lot more nutritional knowledge in the book, and just all these different comparisons. So then you feel like, okay, maybe I should know better. Maybe I should be further. Maybe I should be doing this. Maybe I should be doing that. Like, there's so many different elements to what could be leading us to food as a solution. And you also mentioned the sabotage mindset, and you can also bring in the whole, self-sabotage, but also the over-restriction, which leads to self-sabotage, or the thought in our mind that there's a trigger, it's nighttime, I have this story that every single night I'm going to do this.
Yeah. I mean, the first part you mentioned around why we use food as this crutch, rather than thinking about it in terms of like hunger or appetite control. And there's two reasons for that. One is because we have grown up in a society with parents who use food in that way as well. So I don't know about you, Ruby, but when I was a kid, if I was sad, I would, be taken or be given a treat food, what will make you feel better? Do you want your favorite like takeaway or, some chocolate or something like that? And similarly, if you were celebrating or happy or whatever, you go for a meal at a certain place, like, oh, you've been a good boy, let's go to McDonald's and get a happy meal. And it's like, you're then associating these foods with emotional states. And then the second reason is something that Dr. Stephan Guyenet talks about in the Hungry Brain book, where he talks about food that are that contain high calories and have high combinations of sugar and fat have, one, high calories, and two, produce a very specific dopamine response in the brain, which makes you feel better. And so because of those two things, one, our body is hardwired to seek calorific consumption because we used to be in a food scarce environment, but we're not anymore. So food we used to have to, battle, fight, and pillage for, and now we can just, get pizza thrown through our front window, and we don't actually have to move a limb. Like Deliveroo, pizza, delivery instructions, the window's open, pal, just chuck it through. You could just stay sat down the entire time, right? So we're in a very different food environment now, but we've got very high calorie food in abundance everywhere and at a very low cost. And that's another barrier that people have versus, healthy food versus junk food, and the cost association. And that's something we can probably talk about next if you'd like. But you mentioned the whole, like, people feel they should know better. And I think this is one of the key factors of dietary and fitness information, is that information is everywhere because of the internet, because of social media. Not all of it is good, which is a problem. So people do struggle to know who's, who, not necessarily telling the truth, but who's necessarily telling the evidence base, because obviously people don't intentionally lie. They just might have their own dogmatic and biased views due to the way that they've been taught or the things that they've looked at or whatever, which is very easily done because social media is very much an echo chamber of only looking at the things that you believe in.
One thing I just want to add in there, so you can add that into your spiel, is, okay, it's cool to have this evidence-based stuff there, but people are missing the human element whenever they spit out anything. So that's another key consideration. Like, the human element is real.
Yes, and that's what that's the bridge between information and action for people, right? So you said that people think they should know better, and that might be why they're embarrassed. Okay, like, I'm in my 40s and 50s, why am I still struggling with food? When this is something that should be natural. Eating food is a natural thing. Why am I finding it so difficult? But we're finding it so difficult because our food environment is very not natural in terms of the food that's available, at what cost and at what terms and at what time. And also because of the upbringing we've had, as I mentioned, around what people use food for. You've then got the third issue of the shoulding. And when people should themselves, they don't actually inspire themselves to change. Instead, they're actually just belittling themselves that they haven't changed. So when people say, I should be doing this or I should be doing that, that doesn't come from any real inspiration of change. It actually comes from I've seen someone else doing this and I think that I should be doing that because I think I want to look like they do, or I want to be as healthy as they do, and that's what I deem as health. Where really people need to take a step back and think about their own goals, their own things that they value and their own priorities, and think, okay, being me who I am now, in the job that I have, with the family that I have, in the lifestyle that I lead, and the goals that I want to achieve, what's actually going to be the next step for me that's going to allow me to start making some progress? And what do I actually have, one, the ability, and two, the confidence in doing regularly? And that will help someone lead to their next action step. Whereas if we just look at people and think, oh, I should be doing that, you've got to ask yourself where that thought's coming from. Why do you think you should be doing that? Because actually you're a very different person. And that's that comparison angle you were talking about, Ruby, earlier. If we just compare ourselves to people who do this for a living, we're not going to match up to those standards, and we don't need to, because health looks very different on different people. And being healthy is actually just about being at a reasonable body weight, being active regularly in a way that you enjoy, having time for the things that you value in life that bring you joy, and eating a variety of food. That's it.
The confidence thing is largely missed by so many people. And once you realize that, it becomes less about what you eat. It becomes less about what you're doing for movement, because people think that confidence just happens, or we're just born with it, or it's something that's so hard to achieve. But the thing that I told you I really wanted to touch on the most here, which is doing one step at a time and not getting ahead of yourself, because we'll start doing one thing at a time and then we'll be, oh, I'm so awesome. But then all of a sudden, because you're starting to do this one thing at a time, you want to add in the kitchen sink and probably get the baby with the dummy as well. And it's just like, if you just kept consistent with that one thing, maybe push the barriers on that one thing, maybe add in another thing, but maybe not so frequently to start with, but then just try and get it in. We can actually build that confidence in ourselves but then something I also see a lot is our perception on something. Like, for example, if you bring in the whole tracking thing, some people think tracking is obsessive, whereas I think the contrary. I think not tracking is obsessive, because then you'll have people that are upset, that are filled with thoughts about what to eat, filled with anxiety about the fact their body is the way that it is and they can't get the results. And then they're trying to cut out this food and cut out that food, where because there's no numbers attached, it comes down to, no, that's good, that's bad. Oh, I can't have that, I can't have that. Like, that to me is obsessive. Tracking gives you freedom, but it's the perception around tracking. Like, you can make tracking something that's completely overtaking your life, something that is disordered, or you can make it a part of your life and not so dominant in it. And then this comes with like training and exercise. Some people perceive it as, oh, that's hard work. Oh, that's too much effort. I don't want to wake up in the morning to do that. But they're too busy thinking about the external outcome, or what they think they want, what they should be doing, what they think they should be doing, which is probably not what they should be doing. But they're not attaching it to the feeling that comes from it. Like, you think this is probably with that whole comparison thing as well, because, hey, look at me. I find it so easy to get up and go to the gym. Sometimes I don't, but I don't really give a shit as much as I used to, because I know that I will show up the next day and catch up on that session. And I find it easy to eat the way that I do. Like, I've maintained this body for years. It gets gradually better over time, but I'm not overly gaining weight. I'm not overly losing weight. It's easy for me, in quotation marks, because I've been doing this for 7 years, mate. I haven't just been doing it for 1 or for 2 weeks, but that's the thing that people miss. Like, I started out struggling. Like, I could only make it to the gym twice a week, which I found difficult. I had to get my cousin to beep the horn and get me out of my house if I didn't show up to the gym, because she lived close to me. Like, she forced me out of my house. I couldn't just go there. And I was someone, my belief, I actually want to ask you more about your food stuff later on, because I never had that. But my belief when I was younger was, you always give up, you never complete anything. So I had that story in my head. So I struggled to get to the gym. I remember times I used to cry at the gym, come back home and be like, I didn't go to the gym, my whole day's wasted. And it actually occurred to me the other day, I remember now, I used to have sabotaging thoughts around food when it came to that. Like, I didn't work out, I don't deserve to eat like this now, because I didn't do the training for it. I didn't remember that until this podcast. So thank you. That's a good thing to start writing about. But I also had those thoughts, but I don't have them now. And this is what people don't realize. Like, that's why we're here, to help them through that. But they think they need to be perfect. They think they should already have all this stuff together. I'm pretty sure you didn't at first.
No, not at all.
I definitely didn't. So maybe you could put some perspective into that as well. And the other stuff I touched on with all that.
Yeah. I mean, first, obviously talking about, tracking and different dietary methods. I think, as you mentioned, it depends on how you perceive it, but that perception is going to be very much with the individual, both on their personality trait as well as with what they've done or had success with in the past. So we can't force our opinion of a dietary method onto someone else. So no matter how much we say that, like, okay, well, tracking should be freedom giving, you're just viewing it wrong. That's not going to fly with the client. Like, if they find it restrictive, if they find it obsessive, if they find it too time consuming, then it doesn't matter how much we tell them it isn't. They're going to see it that way, and then therefore it's not the right method. Personally, I've had both experiences with calorie tracking. I had the freedom it brought me to bring me out of the clean eating mindset, as you said before. If people don't have numbers, they're looking at things subjectively, good, bad. Whereas if they have the numbers, they're like, okay, that's higher calorie, that's lower calorie, that has maybe more nutrients in it, that has fewer nutrients in it. Oh, right, okay, that's actually what 25 grams of protein looks like in a chicken breast. And you can view it educationally. And that's where I see it as a tool. I see it as an educational tool, as opposed to a tool that should or could be. I mean, people could use it for a long period of time, depending on their goals. But I think if you're a general population, it shouldn't be a long-term tool and doesn't need to be.
Something I also want to mention there is that what you are doing, like what worked for you in the past may not work for you now. What didn't work for you in the past may work for you now. And that's something we need to carry forward. Like, we we think as soon as we start doing something, we're going to have to do it for the rest of the life. Like we're married to it in that way. Like just because tracking right now is probably the best thing to educate you, to take you from your being stuckness to not being stuck and actually having that education. It's like as soon as you get that awareness and have like a year, maybe 2 years in your belt of tracking the food, like these intuitive eaters, there's no such thing as intuitive eating. The reason they are intuitive is because they have the nutritional knowledge now. They've done the steps. They know what works with their body. If you've done dieting in your life before, it is very hard to get into that intuitive state without doing the steps in between, I reckon.
Yeah, and I think, again, calorie tracking is a great way to educate people, but if someone is working either with a practitioner or even just reading the right things, you could probably educate yourself around food by again, like using handwritten food lists. These are protein, and you'd have to read food labels, and so it's a longer process than doing the tracking, because the app obviously does it for you. I think it's how purposeful you are in using that method, and how you perceive it, and then how you use it. Because if someone's had very, very strict dieting rules where they've counted points or things like that, tracking might then just become another like diet for them. So rather than improving flexibility, it actually improves rigidity. And so it's just knowing the person and what's going to work best. And I get your point on intuitive eating, because I see the same trend, one, in myself, and two, in the other practitioners who talk a lot about it. They have the steps before them that led them to that point, and sometimes they're, as you mentioned, they're not as open to those points, and you need to be telling people of your full journey, because people are going to come to you at different points.
It's the most annoying thing in the world. Like people act as though you need it. Actually shits me. Like I love Jordan Syat and I love Sophie Lee. Sophie Lee changed her approach, but they were always saying, just eat the fucking donut. Like just do this, just do this. I'm like, mate, you've been doing this for years. You know how to fit this into your lifestyle. Jerry,
not everyone does.
Jane down the road doesn't, but this is the perfect segue into meal planning, meal prepping. With my clients, like hardly any of them actually track their food. I provide them with a meal plan that's flexible, because then they can actually fit whatever they want within that meal plan without having to track. Like this is the portion of protein that you have. You can have the chicken, you can have the fish, you can have whatever you want for that protein. This is the portion of veggies you need with this meal. Play around with your veggies. The portion of carbs with the meal, if there's carbs with the meal. Like that to me is the best approach for people that don't have the time to do the tracking. But at the same time, there are different ways of prepping and planning your food that I really want you to go into, because not everyone has to do it the strict way. Like that plan can work as flexibly as you allow it to, and as much like whatever you can fit in your schedule, sort of thing.
Yeah, and when you talked about Jordan and Sohee, as you mentioned, of their own journeys as personal trainers and through food, it's understanding where your client is at, so that your content can speak very honestly about your own journey, where they are at, and then how they can bridge that gap. Because that's the only thing people, this is probably more for you as well as personal trainers out there. The people that follow us, what they're looking for is, one, the hope that there is a better future for themselves, and two, that they have the power to change and they have the ability to bring that out. And if you're saying like, oh, it's fine, you can eat the donuts, and it's like someone watching you who is in the middle of a very bad dieting cycle, who's currently 30 to 50 pounds overweight, they're not going to believe you. They're going to look at you and go, well, that's all right for you because you look like that. That doesn't work for me. And if you're not addressing that logic gap in your content, you're going to have a very, very hard time in actually gaining clients. And so it's okay for these people who have hundreds of thousands of followers, and okay, they might have loads of likes and comments on their post, but if you look at the likes and comments on their post, they're all from other personal trainers who think the same thing.
I realize that.
And they're not influencing other people. Whereas in your content, you need to say, okay, well, actually, I understand that you're in this position because I was as well. Like you just mentioned before, Ruby, you struggled to get to the gym consistently. You struggled with certain eating habits consistently. That story, albeit a previous Ruby of 7 years ago, is where your clients are. Yeah. And you need to talk about that as much as you can, because that's going to connect the dots for them. You can have this lifestyle as well if you want it. It's going to be difficult, but here are the steps, here are the tactics, here's the logic gap. And when you talked about meal prepping and planning, I agree in that providing certain clients, especially if they're not going to track or whatever, with maybe example meal plans can really help, because then the way that you put them together, as you mentioned, okay, portions of protein, portions of vegetables, portions of carbohydrates. Here are some lists of these types of foods, and here's a way for you to eat in a manner that will encourage you to listen to your hunger cues more, and you can use these as step-by-step tools to educate people and help them achieve a certain change. I would argue that for some people, if you said, right, let's have this protein and this veg and this carb in every meal, and you gave it to them at a first step, it might be a massive change for someone. You might want to actually work on just getting their protein in at each meal or increasing the amount of fruits and vegetables they have. But depending on the person, again, it's going to be very, very individually led. Planning and prep are two different things. So people look at personal trainers and see how they might prep their food in advance, but they forget that a personal trainer is on the gym floor all day. So they're at the gym from 5 a.m. until 10 p.m. at night. And it's not that a personal trainer couldn't fit some supermarket food into their diet. It's the fact that they don't leave the gym. So if they don't make their food in advance, they have protein bars and protein shakes from the gym vending machine as the only source of food they can get because of the time between clients. And so,
that.
it's like, who wants to be doing that? And but planning is a very different thing. So people often say like, oh, I don't have time to prepare all my food in advance. And it's like, well, who told you that you need to do that? You don't need to be lining up meals and meals and meals of bland food in a Tupperware box unless you're thinking of becoming a stage competitor, in which case you probably might do, because one, your calorie intake is going to be very low, and two, your food is then going to need to be very bland and very filling for you to be able to stick to that calorie target without wanting to kill yourself.
People think that food needs to be bland as well. It's like, no, that's actually something that triggers me a lot with people's food that you see online. And that's exactly what my page is for. I don't know whether you've picked up on it. And same with my podcast. I don't want to show a lifestyle that isn't attainable for people that need our help. And that's what this podcast is about. That's why I'm like, we need to break it down simply. Because people that do full days of eating, it's like it's for people that freaking spend the whole day at home. Like they have these extravagant meals that they cook at home on the go. It's like, mate, most people do not cook at home all of their foods. You need to make it that's relatable. And that's pretty much how I approach my food now, because that way I can help. Like right now in the freezer, I have probably 10 bags of chicken breast in little Ziploc bags, all the same grams. Like I'm not cooking all of my meals in Tupperware. Whereas I have about 14 of my tuna bakes in Tupperware because I freaking love my tuna bake and I don't really need to put that into the freezer. But have one meal that is like that, because that can be like your lunch when you go to the office. And it's simple things, like you said, having the protein, like making sure that protein's the star, making sure that the veggie's the star, ensuring that you're doing these simple things. Going back to the very start of the conversation, you really just need to do the simple things well consistently. And the other topic that we were going to talk about is the importance of patience. And yes, I had my journey, which I finally found photos of, which is why I'm so happy I can talk about it eventually. But I had my journey of striving to stay this leanness because that's how I felt I had to be, because I was like that, like I identified with that. And then because I was staying like that for so long, I was in a deficit, quotation marks, gaining belly fat, in a deficit, quotation marks, because in that stressed out state, overtraining, over dieting had my body probably not even building muscle at all. So it was all pretty much just stress fat, all getting channeled into that. So it could have been a deficit. And I'm pretty sure it was, because I stayed the same weight-ish. But most of that was getting converted into fat. It wasn't doing what it needed to do. And this is what I want you to start talking about as well, is we need periods of eating more. We need more periods, longer periods of eating more. And to keep the fat loss phases as short as possible, like snacks. So they're efficient, they're sharp, and they work.
Yeah, that's the issue with modern diets, I think, and like books and programs of diet books, because they come down to, as you said, like food doesn't need to be bland and boring, for one. So don't look at people who are fit, who are eating bland food out of Tupperware and think that's what healthy eating means, because it's not at all. Healthy eating can mean enjoying a wide variety of foods, but just including plenty of fruits and vegetables and proteins in your meals. And then other than that, there's not really any rules there. And that, again, that's a logic gap for our clients and the general population viewing our content, because they think healthy eating needs to be this bland thing. So why doesn't it mean that? Like, what are the steps to take to kind of bridge that gap? With regards to the patient game, it's so true, right? Because you look at people like you and I, you've been doing this for sort of 7 to 8 years. I personally have been doing exercise in a formal manner since 2010. So we're now like 11, 12 years in. Before that was a keen rugby player. So I've been very, very active for most of my life now. It's very different for someone who says, all right, I want to get into shape. 3 months down the line, why hasn't this happened yet? But going back to the start of this little spiel, there's a difference between training for an outcome and dieting, and we can't see those two things as the same. So going on a diet should mean going into a deficit, as you mentioned, and doing an intentional fat loss phase, which is something like I'm in at the moment. So I'm in an intentional fat loss phase. So I'm doing different things with my food and different things with my routine that I wouldn't do if I was focusing on maintenance. But my goal is to do this fat loss phase and to get out of it. My diet as a whole isn't different. My diet isn't a different type of food. It's not different food types, it's different food amounts, but it's not a drastically different type of food. And that's the issue we have as a Gen Pop, is because we see going on a diet, eating normally as two different things.
Relate this to exercise as well, because it's the same thing with exercise for fat loss.
Yeah,
it is
exactly. It's two different things. And so people get stuck in perpetually dieting, whereas hopefully our goal as practitioners is to educate people on, look, we want to be doing these things as certain habits which are maintainable through your entire life. And then if you wanted to go through a body fat reduction phase, then that is a temporary state of being where you put yourself into a calorie deficit. You might change your training a little bit so that your body can recover and make the necessary adaptation. And then once you've done that fat loss phase, we should be learning how to come out of the other side of it, eating for maintenance, and then either maintaining that level of body fat while hitting certain training goals, or just maintaining that level of body fat through the different cycles of life, right? People will go through different cycles of life where they have new jobs, new houses, new commutes, children, all the rest of these things. Don't worry about it. And all of these different things happen within their lives. The goal actually becomes, how can these people maintain their progress with these different lifestyle shifts? And I think that's the biggest issue we have as practitioners, Ruby, is addressing that logic gap with people of saying, look, a standard diet is there to make you miserable, and all it teaches you is that your food should be drastically different to your everyday lifestyle. Whereas actually what you want to do is find a food and balance that you enjoy. Now let's talk about finding a fat loss. And I think that for a lot of people, when they turn their attention to health and they turn attention to eating more protein and eating more vegetables and exercising regularly and getting better sleep and taking the onus away from trying to lose fat by any means necessary, their bodies actually shift for the better anyway.
That's the hardest thing to do, to actually get them to stop focusing on the scale, to stop focusing on fat loss. And that's pretty much the epitome of what I preach. The more that you focus on the outcome, the less satisfying the process is going to be, the more extremes you are going to fall to, and the more suffering you're going to do, because you're not enjoying the process. And the easier it is to slip off track and then let that single slip downrail you completely. It's if you just manage doing the simple things consistently, tuning into how it makes you feel and staying patient. Another thing you always talk about is controlling what you can, because we are going to go through different phases of life. Like you can probably talk about yourself as well. I actually want to mention something else that you mentioned, but I, for example, went through a half marathon phase. I went through a powerlifting phase. I went through a bodybuilding phase. I went through this period right now where I'm not prioritizing my body. As in, I'm not training to change my body. I'm not eating to change my body. I'm trying my best to stay as the same as I can, because my business right now is my priority before I get out of lockdown, because I'm in lockdown until December. So I'm upgrading a whole thing to create a whole new strategy and program for my business. And that's the thing, like, people have different priorities in life. And just because you can't focus on progressing your body, just because at this moment you can't afford to put in all the mental energy to diet, doesn't mean that you just pull the plug out and let everything go down the bathtub. Like, people think that if they are not chasing fat loss, if they are not chasing, oh, let's just gain muscle, there's nothing there. Like, they do not understand that it's not all about chasing something. It's about being and becoming. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that we need to start pushing out there a lot more.
Well, people get themselves into endless diet cycles because they've never actually discovered how to maintain anything. And that should be the first step, because just like with training, let's say you want to get better at running, getting better at running will require a certain number of sessions in order to improve running, both in terms of technique and your capacity. If you were to then say, okay, I'm pretty good at running, I can run this distance at a certain speed, your ability to maintain that running ability will require fewer sessions than improving it. Okay, so a maintenance will always take less effort than an improvement. Fat loss is the same, building muscle is the same thing. But as you said, the sabotage mindset comes from people's all or nothing stories in their head, and essentially they accept what I would call the fool's choice. They don't see how they can have both. They think, I'm either training all the time or there's no point, I might as well not train and eat like a complete dick. And they take the fool's choice, as opposed to thinking, right, I'm going to prioritize my business because I'm in lockdown and it's a great time for me to do these things because I have more time to focus. I'm therefore going to have less time to train because I only have so much time in the day. But if I can still manage 2 to 3 sessions a week where I do X, Y, and Z, and I make sure I hit the basics when it comes to my food, I can maintain where I'm at now. And that is okay because my focus is somewhere else. And it's teaching people, 1, how to do that, and 2, helping them understand that that's an okay and logical decision to make. Because unfortunately, too many people, again, it comes from the world of the shoulds, it comes from the world of the vision of other people. And they think, because that person's doing that, or because I want to look that way, therefore I need to be doing all of these things. And if even one of those things slip, I'm a complete and utter failure. What's the point? I might as well not bother. And that's the fool's choice.
That just led me to two forks in the road. So there's this whole industry started off like pretty much based on, in my eyes, it was based on the whole bodybuilding stuff. Like, we're bulking, we're cutting. Like, I even used to use the words bulk and cut before. I now never ever use those words, because that's not Gen Pop. That's not the people that we're trying to help. And it's the shit that's out there. It's the stuff that people talk about. Oh, I'm trying to bulk. Mate, like, to me, it just looks like you put on body fat. Like, there is so much, like, there are so many misconceptions around this whole bulk cut. And then I hate this one the most, people bashing on reverse diets. Mate, okay, if you're a competitor, you shouldn't be reverse dieting. You need to actually get your body fat to a healthy level, otherwise you're going to stay forever in that hormonal dysregulated state. But if you're a Gen Pop person, why the hell do you need a recover diet? Why the hell do you need to jump your calories all the way up? Because you shouldn't be dieting that bloody low to start with. It's the biggest thing that gets on my nerves, because I follow this guy who is a Gen Pop coach, but everything he teaches and preaches is for someone who's a sports nutrition student. And it's just like, you're putting out the wrong information there, which is going to confuse the masses, because it's okay, because his clients get away with it because they're 20-year-olds. Like, you can get away with anything at 20. As you get older,
his clients aren't Gen Pop then, are they? They're aspiring competitors.
It's like, there are people that well, they're in their 20s, 30s, but then he gets people that are elderly, pretty much on the same path, but he preaches to them as he does his 20-year-olds. And there's such an incongruence there with the gap. But then you mentioned before as well that you used to be a rugby student. This is the second fork in the road. You used to be a rugby student. You know your whole life about activity. So you can't imagine your life without exercise. You can't imagine your life without that stuff. People that come to us don't have that. Most of them have never even stepped foot into a gym, have never even tried to track their food. A lot of them probably think butter is the healthiest thing to cook your food with, so they lather it all onto their pan without realizing that that's actually putting like 300 calories into a meal that doesn't really add much to your satiety levels. Like they don't realize that the little things like that all add up. And then the shoulding comes in. I should be there already. Yeah, but why? Because that person has been doing this since, like, they've been doing this in high school. They were an athlete in high school. You have only just started to chase your health and fitness now, 38 years later. So there is no shoulds of you should already know how to do this. My comeback to that lady, for example, if I bring her in, is, mate, I could be 20 talking to a 50-year-old and know more than her at my craft because it's my craft. But then someone who's 40, or me, for example, going to like if I went to a 20-year-old and they have the craft of Olympic lifting, they're going to know a shitload more than me, despite me being older than them, because I have not dabbled in Olympic lifting and I don't know shit about it, but it's their craft. Like people think they should know better, but why should you? It's not your craft. You've not educated yourself in it before.
Yeah, and we're not taught about it in school or anything. So if you've not sought that information out and studied it, it's going to be hard. And the thing is, right, you know, if you're working with, as you said, if you're working with general population people, you need to be aware of your language and aware of your techniques, because bulking and cutting is very much a stage show thing, as is reverse dieting. Whereas with regular general population people, unless they are super active, then the eat less, move more paradigm, it is more or less the state of things. But there can be the under eating, over exercising, as you found yourself in Ruby. So it is looking at the individual and finding what works for them, which is why coaches have their job. You know, you need someone who has the knowledge and the outside eye looking in to help you with the roadblocks that you're not aware of, or to help you with things that you might be doing wrong that you're not aware of that you're doing wrong, like the butter incident, as you mentioned. I mean, for me personally, like, I played rugby, but rugby union, playing as a forward prop, it was essentially a big guy's game. So I played rugby and I did a lot of sport. And funnily enough, actually, I suffered from quite bad body dysmorphia when I was a teenager, because I can see a picture of myself over there at 15 years old and I'm really slim. But at the time I thought I was fat, I thought I was overweight, and I did get more chunky as I hit my higher teens, so like 17, 18, because I ended up having my own money from doing a part-time job. I had more freedom as a student with more time to go to the shop across the road and buy snack food. And I did get chunky, and I was overweight in my high teens and early 20s, and continue even as I started CrossFit. I was a chunkier lad, a bigger boy, which is what led me to discover more about food, because I had overweight parents and therefore I had a poor relationship with food because of the whole good versus bad mentality, and a mother who did Weight Watchers 7 times, as well as the Special K diet and other such things, that led me to have a pretty poor paradigm around food. And it wasn't until I discovered tracking and flexible dieting that I broke free of that paradigm. And now I'm obviously on the other end of that as well. And now, being a 30-something-year-old lad who sits down for most of the day and isn't anywhere near as active as he was in his mid-20s, I now need to find another approach. So again, it's being honest with people about their past, their present, their stage of life, and then helping them find what healthy and fit looks like for them. As you said, avoid the shoulds, because everyone else has got, like you, Ruby, you'll have a completely different experience than I do.
Yeah.
So that all of that plays into what's going to be the best thing for you in terms of health and fitness. And I honestly believe that every client knows really what improvements they could make. that could be subtle and have a dramatic difference. They just need someone to listen to them and help bring it out of them and help them accept that that is okay for them to work on, rather than, yeah, but I should be doing that. As you said, why should you? Where does that come from?
And to add into that, they need that patience and the
Patience is key.
and the like the patience and blocking themselves off from the shiny object syndrome, which out of all that, it is for them the best note to land on. Like, this is what we do. We are coaches. We do the work for you. We assess your current situation. We assess your past. We consider your past. We see how that led to the future. Well, it led to the current. And like you keep bringing up, because it is so important, because it comes up with my clients as well, which I have to dig into, but on another podcast. But our parents have the biggest influence on who we are today and how we approach our food. Aside from our parents, it's what happened in school, where we bullied, what happened in that environment. And like you said, as soon as we enter high school, we don't really give a fuck about food because we're socializing. We'll go to bloody Macca's down the street. We had Macca's across the road. We had a lolly shop across the road, and I always used to get those. I had the same history as you. I used to always go to that. And that's how my whole cascade began, because then I started to hit puberty, see that, oh my God, I'm not happy with my body, got the body dysmorphia there. Like, we take, like, all that stuff impacts where we are now. But then it's, you need to learn to, that isn't you anymore. Stop dwelling on that. A lot of us dwell on that. We need to take what we need from it to then help us to move forward. And actually, that's what we're for. That's where I want to take this. Like, we consider where you are now, and we develop a plan for you. We make it for your situation and what you can do. We take you from however you need to track your food, however you need to plan your food, however suits you, we make that plan for you. But to end this perfectly is, there are so many people out there that, despite knowing that they can't fit into a certain program sustainably for a long period of time to keep their results because we have a weight maintenance issue, they think the program's the answer. They still go to these programs over and over again, have the same problems. As soon as they get the problem again because they got the results, and then they're spiraling out again, oh, fuck, I need another program. Sorry, it's Australia. We swear a lot. And then there's like a 12-week challenge over there. So then they jump onto that, and it's like they get stuck in this cycle without realizing they just need someone to help them with their current situation, and then they can break free from that cycle forever. So that's a good way to tie this up with, most problems we have with food aren't about food because of what I just mentioned. And then we continue the cycle because we put ourselves into it.
Yeah. The problem is the short-term solutions out there that are advertised to the masses as the thing that's going to drive their results. The other problem is that they've had results from them in the past, and so they therefore already have skin in the game. I've done that. I'll do that because it worked. And it's like, yeah, but you're where you are now. And you're like, yeah, but that worked. It's like, well, it didn't, because you're doing it again. And I have to resist. And the thing is, right, Ruby, is that we could say this until we're blue in the face, but if you argue with people, you're not going to change their minds. And so, like, I see accounts popping up all the time of like, ooh, doing Slimming World again. And you're like, why are you doing it again? Oh, there's no point, because they'll just dig their heels in. The better way is to talk to the problem of, okay, you've done a 12-week program, now what? Like, okay, you've done a 90-day transformation, now what? And 90-day transformations are advertised by coaches who are in great shape, as if it's like, yeah, this is what I did to get in great shape. No, you didn't, you fucking nugget. You've been doing this for 10 years. Like, if I did a 90-day fat loss phase, yeah, okay, I'd look ripped and I'd have abs and pecs and all the rest of it. But that's because I've been weight training for 12 years. Like, I'm going to be able to reveal those muscles because I've built them over a long time. Whereas someone who just does a deficit for 90 days, who's never lifted a weight in his life, that's not a realistic transformation to show them. So I think if we could give the people listening to this a nugget of information, it would just be to be as skeptical as you can to everything that you see. Why has that worked? How have they done that? Why are they saying that? Where does that come from? Why this? Why that? Why do I think this? Why is that true? Because the more that you can ask that question, why, okay, yeah, there's a detox plan being sold, but what part of my body's being detoxed? Why does that matter? Why is that going to help? How is that going to benefit me? If you can do those things and look for scientific and logical answers as opposed to, oh, I'm, it'll work because I say it works. It's like, right, pal, thanks.
That is so good. That is, yeah. So the nugget to take away is don't be a nugget.
Yeah.
Like question yourself as well, question your stories, because where is that thought coming from?
Where have they come from?
Why do you think you can't stop there? How it's the next step. It's always a next step. And
master your stories.
Yeah.
Learn your emotions.
Until you start to actually question yourself a lot more, which a lot of people are very hesitant to even dig into it. But until you do that, you're keeping yourself stuck in your own perpetual narrative that you literally hold the pen for. And that's what we're here to help you facilitate. And you just need to find the story that changes just that littlest thought in your mind that gives you hope. Because you mentioned that before, as soon as you know that you have that power to change, you need to feed it consistently, because then you will actually see that you are not your stories. So I'll let you sum it up, and I'm going to put your Instagram below. If there's anything else, you can say it here as well, and I'll put that down below. And
cool. Yeah. Well, Ruby, thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed this chat. I think if there were to be a takeaway with people, it would be to understand that small changes are the most sustainable changes, and that the only thing that matters is their journey, not anyone else's. So have your blinkers on and focus on what's right for you. And yeah, if you can become the master of your internal stories, then you'll realize that actually the change that you want to make is within you. You just need to trust it. I have a podcast called Next Step Espresso, which is like a daily 5 to 10 minute episode about nutrition, fitness, or mindset. And then on a Friday, I have a longer episode either with a guest or with the other coach of the business, where we just talk about a certain topic. So worth checking out. I've heard it's all right. I've heard it's quite good. And personally, my Instagram handle is at Jonny Landels, which I'm sure you'll put in the chat so people can spell the name correctly. So if people want to hit me up on the DMs or ask any questions, then please feel free, because I'm reasonably active on that platform.
Yes, he puts up quite a lot of stories up there too, showing you that there is more to life than just slaving away at your food and your training. So thank you for coming 100%. On. It was an awesome chat, and I'm sure a lot of people took away nuggets from this. So thank you.
Cheers, Ruby.